Good morning, Year 4. I hope you're all well. Today in English, we will be learning how to use time adverbials in our writing. And by the end of this lesson, you will know that fronted adverbials are words, phrases, or clauses that come before the main clause in a sentence. You will also know that time adverbials modify, they change the verb or the main clause by describing when something happens. And then you'll be able to write a paragraph from the perspective of a character in a text, so the text, the explorer, using time adverbials to link your ideas together. And before we start today's lesson, I do have some more retrieval questions for you. Now, the first two are based on our reading sessions, and the third one is something we did quite a long time ago. And I wonder if you can remember 3 features of a newspaper report. So pause the video and work on these 3 questions, please, and write your answers down in your on your page. Okay, off you go. Okay, so number 1, which of these is a synonym for incredulously? Well, is it unconvinced, upset, or believing? Well, the answer is unconvinced. If you're incredulous, you don't believe something. So the antonym for incredulously would be believing. Number 2, give a definition for the word crumpling. Now, I bet all of you remembered the picture of that piece of paper that was crumpled up into a ball, because that is exactly what crumpling means. Crumpling means where something is crushed to form creases and wrinkles. And we know that in the story, in the book The Explorer, one of their faces was crumpling, and that's where their face was crushing to form creases and wrinkles, maybe because they're a bit upset. Okay. And finally, name 3 features of a newspaper report. I wonder if you remembered any of these. I wonder if you remembered that newspaper reports have a headline, a photo with a caption, quotes from the actual witnesses or the people that were there at the time. It has an introduction using the 5 W's, who, what, where, when, and why. And also it has a mixture of facts and opinions. But you only needed to name 3 of these, but I've got some more if you had any of these in your answer too. Okay, so as we are looking at diary entries this week, we already now know that diaries should be written in first person, so using pronouns such as I or my. And they should also be written in past tense, because diary writing is something that has already happened. So when you are writing your diary, as if you are Fred in the rainforest, you will be writing in the past tense. Now, something else that diary writing must include is the use of time adverbials. Now, these are pretty similar to when we looked at time conjunctions last week when looking at our narrative poems. And they describe when something is happening. So time adverbials can be after that, before lunch, until sunset. So it tells you when something is happening. Now we need to use time adverbials in our writing, in our diaries, because a diary usually describes lots of events that are happening. And we need to use these fronted adverbials, these time adverbials, so the reader and the person who is looking at our diary know when the events have happened. Imagine if you just use the word then throughout the whole diary. If you said, then I did this, then I went here, then I ate this, then I went to sleep. That can get very boring. So we need to mix it up and make it really interesting for our reader, and we need to use a mixture of time adverbials. But some of you might be thinking, what is an adverbial? Well, an adverbial is a word or a phrase, so a group of words, that is used a bit like an adverb is used. And it gives additional information about either the time, the place, or the manner of the verb. So the manner of the doing word, the action. A bit like an adverb does, because when we add an adverb, it describes how the verb is doing. So if we are walking, that's our verb, but slowly walking would be our adverb. But today we're going to be focusing on adverbs of time. So we know what an adverbial is, but today we are focusing on fronted adverbials. And a fronted adverbial is the same. They are words or phrases used to describe the action like an adverb. But what makes it a fronted adverbial is that they are used at the beginning of a sentence. So we are today going to be focusing on adverbials, words or phrases that describe the action, the verb, and we are going to be using them at the beginning of a sentence. Now, there are lots and lots of different types of fronted adverbials. We could have fronted adverbials to describe the time that something happens, such as before sunrise. The frequency, so how often something happens, such as every so often. The place that something happens, such as at the back of the cave. The manner, so how it happens, as quick as a flash, but also the possibility, how likely something will happen, such as almost certainly. Now you can see that at the start of every sentence is where our fronted adverbial is, because they are at the start of a sentence. Now, the fronted adverbial that we are going to be looking at today is the time that something happens. So today you are going to be focusing on the time that something happens, because we are going to be speaking in our diary all about when we are doing things, because we're in a rainforest and we're going to be a bit lost and a bit abandoned. So that the adverbial of time will really suit the diary that we are writing. Now, before we move on, did you notice how the fronted adverbials were punctuated? What punctuation was always used in our fronted adverbials? Can you pause the video and have a think, please? Did you notice that after the fronted adverbial, it's always a comma? So when we write our fronted adverbial, we always need to include a comma straight after it before we then explain the next step. And I have got some fronted adverbials here for you. Now these are all adverbials of time. So lots of them you're going to be using in your writing today. So I want you to take your time to read through some of them. Do you recognise any of them? Have you used any of them in your writing before? How could you use some of these? Pause the video and have a quick read through some of them, please. Off you go. Okay, did you manage to recognise some of them? I'm sure you've used lots of them in your writing, and lots of them that you are going to be using today. Now I have got some sentences here, and we need to figure out where the comma should go in this fronted adverbial sentence. So my sentence is, after a while, Fred felt nauseous. And this word nauseous means that he felt sick. So we need to find the fronted adverbial. So we know because it's a fronted adverbial, it goes at the start of my sentence. So, after a while, Fred felt nauseous. So we know we're finding the adverbial that describes the verb. So the verb being felt, he felt nauseous. We are also looking at adverbials of time. My time here is after a while. That tells me when the verb is happening. After a while, Fred felt nauseous. So my comma should go after while, because that separates my fronted adverbial from my main clause. Why is this a main clause? Fred felt nauseous. Why is that a main clause here for? Can you remember what a main clause is? Pause the video and have a think, please. Did you remember that a main clause makes sense on its own? So if I just said to you, Fred felt nauseous, you wouldn't really need any extra information. But we can add the extra information of a fronted adverbial to help us understand when Fred felt nauseous. So we know this describes the time. Okay, next sentence here, can you put the comma in the right place in this sentence? Early this morning, I made a fire out of flints and steel. Pause the video and find where the comma should go, please. Off you go. Okay, did you spot that our adverbial of time here was early this morning? So that is our group of words that make our fronted adverbial of time. So our comma should be here. So it's telling us that early this morning, when I made a fire out of flints and steel. Now, can you also see that this sentence here, I made a fire out of flints and steel, is a main clause? It makes sense on its own, and we don't need any other information to that sentence for it to make sense, but we can add the fronted adverbial early this morning to make it a bit more detailed. And we know that because it's describing when, early this morning, it's describing the time. Okay, last one. The next minute I knew I had to try and escape the rainforest. Can you pause the video and find where the comma needs to go, please? Okay, did you spot the comma had to go after the word minute? Because that is telling us when something has happened, the time that it's happened. The next minute is our fronted adverbial, and I knew I had to try and escape the rainforest is our main clause. Fantastic work, year 4. And again, it's a fronted adverbial of time because that's what our focus is today. Now, today, you are going to imagine you are Fred. You're going to put yourself into Fred's shoes and imagine that you are Fred and that you are in the rainforest. Now, we are going to use 4 adverbials of time to create a paragraph about how Fred is. Now, we need to make sure that when we are writing our paragraph that we write about the same thing for each of the adverbials. So I have given you the examples here of the fronted adverbial of time, early this morning, followed by soon after, followed by just then, followed by eventually. So you can see here that it comes together a bit like a sequence of events, and that's exactly what we need to do today. However, we need to make sure that we are speaking about the same subject that we are for this adverbial of time, and this adverbial of time, and this adverbial of time, and this adverbial of time. So we don't want to start by speaking about food, and then go on to speaking about making the raft, and then go on to speaking about finding a den, and then go on to speaking about finding a forest. We want to speak about the same subject. You may choose to speak about the food for the whole of your paragraph. You may choose to speak about your sleeping arrangements, or the den, or the raft, okay? Now, we're going to do one example together, and I want to see whether you think my example is a good example or a not so good example, okay? So, I've decided that I want to imagine that I am Fred and that I have just woke up, and I've woke up with a growling tummy because I'm really hungry. So I'm thinking, how can I extend my fronted adverbial? What can I say? Well, I've made sure that I've got my comma after my fronted adverbial of time. So early this morning when I woke up. So I've got my verb. I woke up. So I'm Fred, so I'm speaking in first person. Early this morning, I woke up. Okay, so what happened next? Soon after, what did I feel? How did I feel in the rainforest? My stomach was rumbling. So early this morning, I woke up. Soon after, my stomach was rumbling. Just then, I searched around the den for food. So I'm still thinking about food. So it's all the process of me trying to get food in the rainforest. Eventually, what happened last? So I'm searching around the den for food. Do I find food? Do something else happen? Eventually we found food. So I would like you to think about, is this a good example of effectively using adverbials of time in my writing? Is it detailed? Does it explain a lot? Can you really get a sense of where I am from just reading this? Pause the video and read my adverbials followed by the main clauses, and then just put a few sentences together in your mind of whether you think it's effective or not. Okay, pause the video and have a think about that now, please, year 4. Off you go. Okay, show me with your thumbs. Do you think that's effective or not? I promise I will not be offended. Effective or not? Oh, I can see lots of thumbs more down here. And you know what? I completely agree with you. This is not a very effective way of using adverbials of time in my writing. I have not included any adjectives when I've spoken about my adverbial of time. I have not elaborated or extended my sentences enough. You've done so much super practice on making sure that you create imagery in your narrative poems last week. So let's bring that knowledge over and use it in our diary entries too. My sentences are far too small. If my reader was reading this, they might be quite bored when they're reading it. And it doesn't really tell me much. Early this morning, I woke up. Soon after, my stomach was rumbling. Just then, I searched around the den for food. Eventually, we found food. The end. If you were reading that, would you fall asleep? Probably. Okay, we're going to have a look now at an example which is a bit better, and this is how I would like you to use this too.